Shalom, Bruchim Abayim to Kolel Ahavat Yisrael, Kolel of San Diego. We're continuing in Hilchot Kashrut in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. We're on Siman Mem Vav, that's Hilchot Ma'achalot Asurot, Laws of Forbidden Foods, and the Seif, we're up to Kaf Vav, that's 26. Kaf Vav. This is the continuation. We're continuing on the laws of cooking different types of food in the same oven, in one oven at the same time. So either we spoke about cooking kosher with non-kosher, or cooking meat in one pan and milk in another pan at the same time in the oven, and the laws get very get complicated and detailed. So good that we're strengthening them and learning these over. Says the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, Pat she'afo imatzli b'tanur echad. So here, roasting meat and bread in the same oven. So the bread was baked together with in an oven that roasting meat was going on together in the same oven. Im haya tanur satum, that's li megula. So if the oven was sealed and the roasted meat was open, so here you have a problem of the aroma mixing in, because the oven is closed, so there's no ventilation. There's not enough ventilation for the aroma not to carry over, and the roasting meat is uncovered. Both of these two things are negative, and therefore asur hapat lachlo b'chalav. So this bread you would not allow to be you would not allowed to eat it with milk, together with milk. What's different here from the halacha that we said last time above is here at least the bread you'd be able to eat it by itself, or you could eat it with meat. It's going to have some kind of aroma of meat, but it's not enough to make the bread unfit like that you would have to discard it. You would not allow to be able to eat the bread, like we said, because we said in the very last seif that if you make bread and you make it to be either dairy or meat, and it soaks up enough of the dairy of the meat to become milk bread or meaty bread, so that bread itself is not allowed. You're not allowed to have it at all. We learned about that in the last shiur. Continues the kitzur. Aval im hatzli haya mechuseh. What if the roasted meat was covered properly? O shaya tanur patuach, or the oven was open a little bit. It means it's not completely sealed. It had a little bit of opening to allow for the ventilation. So now we have two positive things. We have the roasting meat is covered. It's not open. So the aroma won't go from the meat into the bread. And the oven. The other positive thing that we have here is that the oven is a little bit open. It's not completely sealed. So vehu tanur gadol ketanurim shelanu, and it's like a large oven, like our ovens. So it explains what's a large oven is also talked about in the Shulchan Aruch. What's considered a large oven? But I think the ovens that we have at home, the full-sized kitchen oven is the kind of large oven that we're talking about. So in that case, where we have these two things or three things, three conditions. So it means that the roasting meat is covered, or the roasted meat is covered, or the oven is open. So any of these things would be allowed to. He says mutar, and then you would be allowed to eat it together with milk. So either you have the roasting meat covered properly, or even if it's not covered, if you had ventilation in the oven, that the oven door was open just a little bit, that would be enough, and it would be allowed. It wouldn't be asur to eat together with dairy. Umikol makom. So it continues the kitzur. So these things are all things that happen, are not the best way to do it, but we want to know if it's mutar or if it's asur. So it continues. Mikol makom lechatchila. Yesh li zaher shelo litzlot basar b'tanur she'ofin bo pat. So, but really, if you have any way to avoid this, to avoid cooking cooking, roasting meat and baking bread together in the same oven at the same time, so you should definitely be careful not to do that at all. Why? If we said that there is ways to make it okay, so why shouldn't we do it all? There's another problem. Shema yazuv min hashuman tachat hapad. That maybe some of the fat or the residue from the meat will yazuv. It will spill. Tachat hapad va'afilu atzlihu b'machavad yesh lachush. So there's a whole nother problem. Even if we have the tzli, which is the roasting meat, covered, and we have the oven is open, so there still is another problem that some of the fatty residue from the meat might spill out, and then it can get onto the oven. If it gets onto the bottom of the oven, that's a whole separate problem, which we're going to see in the next seif. So, the kitzur, in any case, we should be careful not to cook bread and meat together in the same oven. But if someone is in a special case and you need to, you have only one oven and you're short pressed on time. So if you use one of these heterim mentioned in this seif, so then you would be allowed to go ahead and do it. And you'd be allowed to eat the bread as well. Kav Zayin, like we said, we're continuing. Tanur shezav bekarka shelo shuman o chalav. So this is the halacha of an unclean oven. So everything we said until now of cooking different types of food together in the same oven was talking about a clean oven. So an oven that is not clean, that the residue, it either has meat in the walls on the walls of the oven, in the bottom of the oven, the floor of the oven, or dairy from when last time you used it for dairy. So that causes a much bigger problem. And then tzarich hesek kedin ad shichlu hagechalim al pnei kulo v'yitlaben. In that case, it would have to be kashered. And to kashering an oven, it have to be properly kashered. So if you have residue from meat or residue from dairy, if it's an oven that you're using for both meat and dairy, so you should know once any meat gets onto the oven, onto the bottom of the oven or the walls, then it can only be used for meat and cannot no longer be used for dairy until it's kashered. The laws of kashering ovens are discussed also in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch in Siman 116. Continue on to different types of halachot. This next halachot is halacha in Sif Kaf Chet is talking about the castration of animals that is used for food. So let's see. Tarnagolim misurasim noagim la'achlam. So chickens that were castrated, the custom is that you're allowed to eat them. Now, castrating animals is one of the isurim in the Torah. It says "B'artzecha lo tasu." It's one of the things that we are not allowed to do. We don't castrate animals like some of the non-Jewish nations do. However, if an animal was castrated and it was castrated properly, so then you would be able to. It wouldn't become. The question is, it would be a treifa. Would it be? We learned before that there are if your injuries, certain injuries to animals, if an animal is either wounded or injured on its own, even. So it could cause treifa. It could cause that it's an injured animal and it's not kosher anymore. It loses an animal that's becomes injured, loses its kosher status. So what about this castration? So the testicles of the animals were removed, and so the assumption is that it was done by a non-Jew, because, like we said, for a Jew, this is asur. It was prohibited for a Jew to do. So this assumption is done by a non-Jew, and now you have this animal, and we want to know if it's kosher or not. So says the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, Noagim le'achlam. The custom is that we do eat it. It's okay. Why? Mishum desomchim demistama akum ha'mesari su'uman ubaki b'davar shelo yaseh b'tfira ezereota b'vnei ma'ayim. So we have a smichut. We rely on something over here. We rely on a fact, on a general fact, that the people that do these things, the people that take care of these animals on their farms or whatever it is, and that operate on the animals and do the castration, whatever. So we assume that he was a baki, uman baki b'davar. That means he's a professional at what he does, and he won't cause any problem. He's not going to mess something up over here in the animal that would consider it to be in the chicken that would make the chicken to be a treif. The problem would be that somewhere in the intestines, if he causes a dent or an injury into the intestines by doing the castration, so that would cause it to be a treifa, and that would make it not kosher. But like we said, we rely on the fact that it's okay and that he was professional, and so then it's okay. Aval im nimtza be'en ezer reuta afilu she'enan munachin karui harei en asurim. But if you look at the animal and you see that there is a problem, you see that there's that the intestines are something they were dented or damaged, or you see a problem in the animal that would cause it to be treif. So obviously, then it is treif. It's not saying that we can always do it, but we have to. If you see something wrong with over there, then it would be treif. Kaf tet, the next one. Continue on injuries to animals. That the different injuries, like we're saying, they could cause the isur treifa, that an injured animal is rendered non-kosher, and so it says the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Biktzat mekomot noagin ha'akum ha'mefatamim ha'avazot lemachran liYisraelin. In some places, the non-Jews have a custom that they overfeed the ducks, and they sell them to Jewish people. So what do? Shedokrinotam tachat kanfeim b'machat. So they have this trick that they stick with the needle underneath the wing of the ducks, the avazot. So or other things that they do. So this is one thing. It says shedokrinotam tachat kanfeim b'machat, that they take a needle and they would stab under the wing. Kadesh yitpateach habasar v'yitru shmenot. In that way, that was a special trick that would cause that the meat would fluff up and the ducks would look very fat by doing this trick. So now, what did they do? They injured the animal. They stuck it with the needle. So maybe that would cause it to be treifa. That's what we're talking about here. So let's see. So says the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, v'yesh b'zeh she'elat chacham im ksherot or lo. So here you would have to know, and if this practice is done by, let's again, the non-Jews that have the custom to poke or stab the animals, the ducks, in order to make them look fatter. So you would have to ask a she'elat chacham. In that case, the laws are very complex. So you'd have to ask the rabbi if it's considered still kosher, or if it became a treifa, non-kosher duck. V'chein behema. Also, what about an animal? Here we're talking about avazot, about ducks. First we're talking about chickens, now we're talking about ducks, now behema. What about an animal? Asher lefamim machmat rov achila mistakenet. So in animals that are on the farm, sometimes they're overfed in order to make them nice and fat, so that they'll sell for more money. So sometimes they eat so much, machvat rov achila, they eat so much, mistakenet, that they get endangered from overeating. Urufuata, how do they feel? How do they heal? What do they do when an animal goes in danger because of overeating? Shedokrino tabimartzeh neged akares. Again, you stab it with a nail, something near the stomach of the animal. So now you're like this was also a trick in order to get the animal to it's to make the animal feel better, to give it some room to breathe. They would puncture the animal near the stomach. So again, you have to ask the rabbi if such an animal, if you hear that this is done and this was done in this farms and such an animal was done to, so you would have to ask the rabbi if the animal is still considered kshera, a kosher animal. So, Lamed, continuing on. So this halacha is talking about different issues that happen when you're making preserves. Preserves like a jelly or a jam, preserves made also of different foods. But the way that they would make the preserves was we'll see. So the custom is to make that when people make preserves, so you put the fruits in the jar. And they would cover it by tying the lid of the jar with the womb. The shalpuchit is the womb of the animal. So they would have and have ready available a womb of an animal that's a piece of meat or womb from an animal, and they would tie that to the top of the jar. And what did that do? So then they would put it into an oven, this jar that has the fruit inside it and it has the womb of the animal on top, and they would put it into the oven, and that's how they would make the preserves. Says the Shulchan Aruch, tzrichin lizaher sheyesh alpuchit mi behema kshera. So this piece that you put on top of the jar. So let's wait a second. You can't just put any piece of meat on the jar here. It has to be kosher, completely kosher. Why? It's not touching the food. So we'll explain. So tzrichin lizaher sheyesh alpuchit mi behema kshera. It has to be from a kosher animal. It has to be koshered meat, and you have to kasher the meat. That means the way how you make meat kosher by salting and so on and so forth. Gam b'mlicha, and it also has to be salted. V'hadacha karui, salted and rinsed like we do with any kosher meat. So the piece of womb that you use, that has to be completely kosher meat. So they explain over here that as the fruit warms in the oven, so steam rises up from the fruit, and then the steam goes into the piece of meat that's on top, the womb that's covering the jar, and then it takes on that steam takes on the flavor. Now it's meat flavored steam, and then what happens as it keeps cooking? Now it goes down, and then it descends and it goes down into the preserves that you're making from the fruit. So if the meat wasn't properly koshered, if it's not completely kosher meat, so then that steam is steam of non-kosher meat that's getting all mixed in to the fruits, and that would cause the fruits to become not kosher, just like the not kosher meat. Continuing, Sif Lamed Aleph. Now we're moving on to the halachot of how careful we have to be in checking our food for any worms or insects, any kind of vermin, crawling creatures that could be, whether we see them, how clear we see them. So we have to know how careful, and we're talking now about these halachot. So it says in the Torah, Al tishaktzu et nafshotechem בכל השרץ השורץ, ולא תטעמו בהם ונטמאתם בם. The Torah says, with regard to insects and crawling creatures, don't make yourself disgusting by eating by eating the sheretz hashoret, by eating a creature. It's called a sheretz, and these are not kosher. Any insects or worms that crawl on the ground are not kosher, and eating them, the Torah says, "V'lo titamu b'hem v'nitmetem bam." That if someone eats insects or non-kosher food, or you go to a salad bar and it's a non-kosher restaurant, it's not just, you can't just assume, like we spoke before, assuming food to be kosher when there could be a whole bunch of problems with it. So if you go to your local salad bar and you say, what could be the problem? It's just salad. Salad is kosher. So the truth is that we as Jews have a very thorough process of how we clean the vegetables and how we check them and clean them. And any salad, including cleaning, so it has to be checked, which we'll see later on how to check different vegetables and different things for worms, but they have to be checked. And like we said, the problem is if it's any sheretz, any insect or worm that went on the ground, that goes on the ground. We'll see. So we start out with talking about in worms or insects that are found in water, in bodies of water. So, Lamed Aleph. Be'erot u'neharot shemuchzakin sheyesh b'meimehem tolaim. You have springs, be'erot, springs, neharot, rivers, shemuchzakim, that it's well known. It's known that in these rivers or these springs, they have worms. Asur says like the Kitzur, Asur lishtotan ad shisanenu otam. So what is the trufa? How do you come to drink the water from springs or from rivers that are known to have worms in them? So you can filter it if you filter out the water properly, and we'll see. We'll talk in the next seif. We'll talk about filtering, but water can be and must be filtered before drinking it if it's known that they have any insects or worms inside the water. I know where I spent many years on the East Coast in New York. So depending on what city you're in, so if you're upstate, Muncie, Spring Valley, so the water is clear from insects, and you can filter it if you want. But you don't have to filter it. But if you go into to the 5 boroughs, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens, and so on and so forth, so those places they were known to find. They found insects in the water, and that water, according to the halacha, is asur. So in all of those cities, you can't just open up the tap water and start drinking the water. Everybody has at their home a filter. It's a batter, either a Brita filter or one of these kind of water filters that they do a very good job at filtering out anything that might be inside the water. So ad shisanenu otam. Va'afilu b'di'avad. So what happens if you took this water from one of these places that has insects in the water, and you use the water, so you cooked using that water. So now what about the food that you cooked using that water? So you'd have to ask, what would be the halacha? He says here, yesh le'asor. If you use that water for cooking, you would it would be asur, even the food, the whole dish of food that you cooked in that water, you would have to throw out. And you can't soak in this kind of water. You say, I'm just going to soak the meat. No, you can't soak the meat either. You can't use it. You can't use it for anything for food. You can't use it for lehadiach behem devar machal. That means to rinse off a different type of food using this water. So you can't do that either. Why? Because the worms, they stick to the food. They're in the water. You put food in that water. You're cooked with it, or you soaked in it, or you rinsed with it. That water, the worms that are in that water, even they're very, very, very small and hard to see, they get stuck to the food, and that would cause the food to become not kosher because it has these worms. I'd like to explain a little bit what we said. Kol hasheretz hashorets, that the sherets, the vermin, the rodent, whatever it is, the insect, it crawls on the ground. So the kitzur here, if we look back to the beginning, beirot u'naharot, he's talking about springs and rivers. Why springs and rivers? Because that's to be simplicity, to get the simple case. The simple case is springs and rivers. Why? Because worms that are found in standing bodies of water, like rainwater that's in puddles of water. So if the worm was formed in that water, in a puddle of rainwater, so those worms are actually not prohibited. They're kosher. There's such a thing as kosher worms. So the Torah tells us don't eat worms. They're disgusting. On the other hand, it says when they walk on the ground. So if they never made it to walk on the ground, and which we'll see here as we continue. So if it's in rainwater or a puddle, so then they're not prohibited until they go poresh, until they emerge and they go out of the water. So if a worm would go out of the puddle of rainwater and then go back in, so then at that point it would be prohibited, because it's now something that was crawled the ground. So, but what about beirot and harot? Like we said, springs and rivers. So that's flowing bodies of water. So springs and rivers, those are like karka. Those are considered like the land itself, because they're part. They flow with the land. So it's like, so those worms are prohibited even if they don't emerge from the water, even if they were the ones that formed inside rivers. Those are the bad ones. Those are rivers or springs. Those, even if whether it ever comes out of the water or not, it's asur. It's one of it's a non-kosher worm. That's why we chose beirot and naharot, because we want to talk about the problematic type of worms, and that's what those would be. Lamed Beit, continue on. This is continuing more on filtering water. So we said that water, even if it's known that it could have something in it, something not kosher in the water, you can filter the water, and then you can drink the water. So how do you filter the water? Lamed Beit, so it says, when you filter the water, you have to be careful that we should filter it through a cloth. Because any kind of filter that you use, if it's not a cloth, these tiny worms that are almost microscopic, that you almost can't see them at all, so they could go, they're so tiny that they could go through anything. Nothing could filter them, but a cloth is the only way that could filter them. Continuing on, Lamed Gimel. So this Eve talks about worms that are found not in water, but in vinegar. So worms that are found in vinegar, there are some interesting things lahalacha. Chometz shitlia asur al yedei sinun. So vinegar that the worms formed inside the vinegar. So really, these worms would be kosher worms because they are like standing, like worms that we said, like found in standing bodies of water, like a puddle. This vinegar is a standing body; it's not a flowing thing. So it would not. They would be okay. But what happens? So you say asur. He says asur al yedei sinun. You're not allowed to filter those worms from that vinegar. כי אפילו תולדה כשבדקין שנתהווה בחומץ עובר דרך כל מפה. Because even תולדה כשבדקין שנתהווה בחומץ, even the smallest of worms, if it's made in formed inside the vinegar, it can go through any mapa. It can go even through a cloth. So we just said above in Lamed Beit that when you filter water, you have to use a cloth. But now we're saying for vinegar, they would go through the cloth because they're more slippery, slidey. Somehow they can get through the cloth. Vasinun garuri gare. So what's going to happen now? Now you filtered. You think you have filtered vinegar, but but there's a problem over here. Vasinun gare gare v'yoter tov shelo l'sanino. That the filtering that you just did, you just messed it up. You messed up your vinegar. It had some of these worms. They were kosher worms. Now through filtering it, you made them to be not kosher worms because they went. He says you just made the situation worse. It would have been better. You made it worse, and it would be better not to filter it at all. Because what we said, just like we said, a worm that was formed inside a liquid that was not that, and a liquid, a standing liquid, and it never left the liquid. Like it's in there and never left. What happened now? Now you went and filtered it. You used a cloth and a proper filter, but now you made it worse because because now these little worms that are in the vinegar, it went out of the vinegar and it touched the cloth. It hit the cloth. Once it hits the cloth, that's it. It's no longer in its own where it formed in the body of vinegar that it formed in, and now it became a not kosher. And now what's happened? And now the worm is going to go back into the vinegar, and it is going to be a not kosher worm in the vinegar instead of before like they were all kosher, because it went out of the vinegar and touched the filter cloth, and then it went back in. That's what he's saying here. So what is the best way to do it? What's the best way to handle the situation here? So first you should boil up the vinegar. You say, I don't want worms in my vinegar. I want to filter them out, but I don't want it to be it's not going to have the same problem that the live worm has. The live worm is slippery, slidey, and it can make his body stiff and get through any cloth, through anything from the vinegar. But a dead worm won't make it through this cloth, and therefore the remaining vinegar would be kosher to enjoy. The last if we'll learn for today. Now we're talking about continuing about insects and worms, but now inside of fruits. Lamed Daled, tolaim agdelim beperot beodam b'mchubar asurin. So with fruits, it depends, and this goes along the lines like we just explained. That if it's connected to the tree, and a worm formed in a fruit that was connected while it's connected to the tree, asurin. Those are asur. So why? So the tree, you have to know here, the tree is considered like karka. Karka, land, ground. So the tree is connected to the ground. The tree has a halacha of being of ground. If you sell a piece of land, you sell it. The trees go along with it because the trees are part of the ground. So fruits that grew inside of worms that grew inside of fruit that was connected to the tree, those are asur. And which we're also saying here that a fruit, that worm that grew inside a fruit that was detached from the tree, and then a worm grew inside the fruit, so those worms would be okay. We'll continue, we'll see. Even though they never left the fruit, if it's attached to a tree that's attached to the ground, that's called like it crawled on the ground, called asheretz hashoretz, and that's in your beans that we make in or different vegetables, different beans or fruits, you'll see kamini kutash chor, you'll see like a black dot on the top of the bean, on the bean or on the fruit. That could be, that black dot is the place where a worm began to form. It didn't never get to form, but it started to form. And so how do you fix it? Tzarich litlo misham ba'omek, you have to dig out that black spot. Because that black spot is asur, just like the worm itself. So again, worms that developed inside a fruit that was connected to a tree, those are the not kosher worms. Those are the ones that are prohibited. But worms that develop in a fruit after the fruit was detached from the tree, and they those have never considered as to be crept upon the ground. They never shoretz ala aretz. So those are actually not prohibited. And I don't know how appetizing these worms they're actually kosher would be. I that I can't say, but these are the halachot, and we continue on next time B'ezrat Hashem in the Hilchot Kashrut in the next shiur. Thank you very much.